I'm Patricia, 58 years old, standing frozen in my own living room during my mother's memorial reception. The elegant room feels suffocating as my son Kevin's words hang in the air. I gave all the money from my mother to my wife, he announces proudly to my brother James and 30 stunned guests. My mother's inheritance over $2 million gone. My heart stops as every eye turns to me, watching for my reaction. The champagne glass slips from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor just like my trust. Before I continue this nightmare, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know in the comments. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had family betray your trust. Trust me, what happened next in my story will show you exactly how far some people will go for money and how much stronger we can become when pushed to our limits. My mother Elizabeth was always careful with money. Growing up in the post-war era, she learned the value of every dollar and invested wisely throughout her life. Our family wasn't flashy rich. We lived in a nice but modest home in a good neighborhood, and Mom drove the same Toyota for 15 years before replacing it. Behind this frugal exterior, however, she had built an impressive portfolio of investments, property, and savings. Money gives you options, Patricia, she'd tell me while balancing her checkbook at the kitchen table. Not to buy things, but to choose your own path in life. My childhood with her had structure and clear expectations. Every allowance came with lessons about saving and responsible spending. When I wanted something expensive, she'd help me create a budget to earn it myself. These lessons shaped me, and I've lived comfortably, if not extravagantly, as a result. My brother James had a more complicated relationship with our mother. 3 years younger than me. He always pushed boundaries and resented her strict approach. Their arguments grew heated during his teenage years, and while they eventually established a civil relationship as adults, the underlying tension never fully disappeared. "Mom always liked you better," James would say sometimes, half joking but with an edge of resentment. "You were the perfect daughter." I'd deny it, but truthfully, I knew Mom found it easier to relate to me than to my rebellious brother. When Mom was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer last year, the disease moved quickly. Within 6 months, she was gone, passing peacefully in her sleep, with both James and me at her bedside. We held each other and cried together that night, our complicated family history temporarily set aside in shared grief. The reading of the will 3 months ago brought our differences back to the surface. Mom left me the majority of her estate, $2.4 million in investments and liquid assets, while James received the family home worth approximately $850,000. Her reasoning, as explained by her attorney, was that James had always expressed attachment to the house, while I would benefit more from the financial portfolio since I was approaching retirement age. James's face darkened when the terms were read. "Of course she'd do this," he muttered, walking out of the attorney's office without speaking to me. It took 2 weeks before he called me, voice strained but conciliatory. "I've been thinking about it, and Mom was right. I do love that house. I'm sorry for how I reacted." I felt relief wash over me. "I was worried about you, James." "We're okay, sis," he said. "Let's just focus on remembering Mom, not fighting over her things." With that resolved, I started thinking about what to do with my inheritance. Part of it would secure my own retirement, but I also wanted to help my son Kevin. He and his wife Amber had been married for 3 years, and they were trying to buy a larger home as they planned to start a family. I thought about setting aside $300,000 to help them with a down payment, substantial help, without being enough to create dependency. Kevin had always been a bright child, sometimes too clever for his own good. As a teenager, he could talk his way out of almost any trouble, with a charm that made it difficult to stay angry with him. He'd grown into a handsome man with my brown eyes and his father's strong jaw. After my divorce 15 years ago, Kevin and I became especially close. Or so I thought. His wife Amber was beautiful, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and an impeccable fashion sense. She always seemed pleasant, but kept an emotional distance that I attributed to shyness. During holiday gatherings, she'd help in the kitchen but rarely shared much about herself. "Your mother is so generous," she said when I first mentioned helping them with a house. Her blue eyes lit up with an intensity that should have warned me. "Have you spoken with your financial advisor about the best way to transfer assets?" Looking back, I should have noticed how her questions always circled back to money, how much was in Mom's estate, how it was invested, whether I planned to make any other large gifts. But grief has a way of dulling your perception, and I missed the red flags waving right in front of me. 6 weeks after the will reading, Kevin invited me to dinner at his apartment. Amber served her specialty linguine with clam sauce and kept refilling my wine glass throughout the evening. The conversation eventually turned to my inheritance. "Mom, I've been thinking," Kevin said, leaning forward across the table. "You mentioned helping us with the house down payment, which is incredibly generous." "I want to help you get started," I replied. "My financial advisor suggested that instead of just writing a check, you could transfer the money to an investment account I've set up. For tax purposes," he added quickly. "He says you could save a lot that way." It sounded reasonable enough. "I'd need to talk to Susan about it," I said, referring to my own attorney. "Of course," Kevin nodded, but I noticed him glance at Amber. "But we'd need to move relatively quickly to lock in the interest rate on the house we're looking at." 2 days later, Kevin came to my house with a folder of documents. "These are just standard transfer forms," he explained, pointing to where I should sign. My advisor prepared everything. The papers looked official, with small print that blurred before my tired eyes. I remember hesitating for a moment, my mother's voice in my head urging caution, but Kevin's eager expression melted my resistance. "Trust me, Mom. This is the smart way to do it," he insisted. I signed where he indicated, not realizing I was signing over much more than $300,000. The document included a power of attorney that gave Kevin access to manage all my financial affairs. A clause buried in legal jargon authorized him to make investment decisions in his sole discretion. Kevin was my son, my only child, the person I trusted most in the world. I didn't discover what had happened until that fateful day of Mom's memorial service 3 weeks later. Kevin had been avoiding my calls, claiming he was busy with work and the house purchase. I'd been focused on arranging the memorial, ordering catering, and contacting Mom's friends. The last thing I expected was public humiliation in my own home. After his shocking announcement and the shattering of my glass, I somehow managed to excuse myself and pull Kevin into the kitchen. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice barely controlled. "What money did you give to Amber?" Kevin's face showed no remorse, only a cold determination I'd never seen before. "The inheritance, Mom. All of it." "That's not possible." "I only signed for the house down payment." His laugh chilled me. "You signed a lot more than that. Maybe you should have read the fine print." "Kevin, that's my retirement. Your grandmother's life savings." He straightened his tie, looking at me with detached calculation. "You never appreciated how hard I work. Now, I'm taking care of my future." I heard heels clicking on the kitchen tile and turned to see Amber leaning against the doorway, arms crossed with a satisfied smile. "We appreciate your generosity, Patricia," she said with mock sweetness. In that moment, I saw something in both their eyes, a hardness, a calculation that made me realize this betrayal wasn't impulsive. It had been planned, possibly since the moment they learned about my mother's death. "Kevin, please." I reached for his arm. "This is a mistake. We can fix this." He pulled away. "There's nothing to fix. The transfers are complete and legal." He nodded to Amber, and they moved toward the front door. "We should get going. Lots to do with our new portfolio." As they left, Kevin turned back. "Thanks for the party, Mom. Grandma would have loved it." The door closed behind them, leaving me standing alone in my kitchen, surrounded by half-empty glasses and catering trays, trying to comprehend how my son, my own flesh and blood, could have stolen everything from me. After Kevin and Amber's departure, the memorial reception dissolved into chaos. Several guests left immediately, uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding before them. Others clustered in small groups, whispering behind their hands while casting sympathetic glances my way. James stormed across the living room, face flushed with anger. "What the hell just happened, Patricia? Did Kevin really take Mom's money?" I could barely form words, still in shock. "I think so. I signed some papers. I didn't realize." "I'm going after him," James declared, grabbing his jacket. My brother's longtime friend David grabbed his arm. "That's not a good idea right now, James. You're too angry." "Damn right I'm angry. That little snake and his gold-digging wife just robbed my sister. Several of Mom's church friends looked scandalized at the language, gathering their purses and making quick exits. Others, including Mom's best friend Harriet, moved closer to offer support. "Patricia, dear, is there anything we can do?" Harriet asked, her wrinkled hand warm on my arm. I couldn't answer. The room spun around me as the magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. $2 million gone. My financial security gone. My son's love and loyalty perhaps never real to begin with. James paced the room like a caged animal. "I'm calling the police." "This is theft." "We don't know that yet," said his wife Linda, always the voice of reason. "Patricia needs to speak with her attorney first." My niece Megan, James's 25-year-old daughter, pushed through the remaining guests to reach me. With her dark hair and direct gaze, she reminded me of Mom in her younger years. "Aunt Patricia, let's get you sitting down." She guided me to the sofa while Linda tactfully began ushering the remaining guests toward the door. "Thank you all for coming to honor Elizabeth's memory. I think the family needs some time now." Once the last guest departed, James knelt before me, taking my hands in his. The anger in his eyes had been replaced by fierce determination. "Listen to me, Patricia. We're going to fight this. Kevin is not getting away with this. He's my son," I whispered, tears finally breaking through my shock. "How could he do this?" "It's that wife of his," James spat. "She's had dollar signs in her eyes since day one." Megan brought me a glass of water and a cool cloth for my face. "Mom's right about talking to your lawyer first. You should call her tonight." "It's Sunday," I said absently, as if normal schedules still mattered. "Susan will take your call," James insisted. "This is an emergency." As the reality set in, I began to shake uncontrollably. Everything I had, my savings, my investments, my mother's legacy, potentially gone. The room began to darken around the edges. "She's going into shock," I heard Linda say from what seemed like a great distance. "I'm calling Dr. Brennan," James' voice replied. I don't remember much after that. According to Megan, I collapsed and was unconscious for several minutes. When I came to, I was lying on my sofa with a blanket over me. Dr. Brennan, our family doctor, and another friend of Mom's checking my pulse. "Blood pressure's too high," she murmured. "Patricia, can you hear me?" I nodded weakly. "I'm giving you something mild for anxiety, and you need to rest," she said firmly. "No decisions tonight." James refused to leave, camping out in my guest room despite my weak protests. Linda went home to take care of their dog, but Megan insisted on staying. "I'll sleep on the couch, Aunt Patricia," she said, brooking no argument. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." That night was the longest of my life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kevin's cold stare and Amber's smug smile. Sleep came in fits and starts, plagued by nightmares where I was falling into endless darkness while Kevin watched from above, counting money. Around 3 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep and crept downstairs to find Megan also awake, scrolling through her phone. "I'm looking up financial fraud," she explained when she saw me. "There's got to be a way to undo this." I sat beside her, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. I trusted him completely. "That's not your fault," Megan said fiercely. "Kevin and Amber are the criminals here." "I keep thinking about your grandmother," I whispered. How disappointed she would be in me for being so careless with what she worked her whole life to build. Megan put her phone down and took my hand. "Grandma would be furious with Kevin, not you, and she'd be the first one strategizing how to get it back." A ghost of a smile crossed my face. Mom had been a formidable woman when crossed. "We're going to fix this," Megan promised. "The whole family is with you." As dawn broke, casting pale light through the windows, I felt something solidify within me, a seed of determination, taking root beneath the devastation. Kevin had betrayed me, but I was Elizabeth Carter's daughter. I wouldn't go down without a fight. Monday morning, I sat in Susan Miller's law office, hands clutched around a mug of untouched coffee. Susan had been my attorney for 15 years and had also handled my mother's estate. Her normally composed face showed clear dismay as she reviewed the documents I had brought copies Kevin had left behind of what I'd signed. "Patricia," she said finally, removing her reading glasses, "I wish you had called me before signing these." "Just tell me how bad it is," I replied, bracing myself. James sat beside me, having insisted on coming along. Megan had wanted to join us too, but someone needed to stay at my house in case Kevin returned. Susan sighed deeply. This is a comprehensive power of attorney, with additional authorization for financial management. By signing this, you gave Kevin legal authority to access and manage all your accounts. Can we revoke it? James asked. We can file to revoke it immediately. Susan nodded. But that won't undo transactions he's already completed. How much has he taken? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Susan tapped at her computer, pulling up my accounts that she had access to as my estate attorney. Her expression grew grimmer with each click. Based on what I can see here, almost everything from your mother's estate has been transferred out. The main investment account shows a series of wire transfers over the past 2 weeks. How much is left? James demanded. Susan hesitated before answering. Just under $83,000 remains across all accounts I can access. The room tilted around me. Out of $2.4 million? I'm afraid so. Susan reached across the desk to grip my hand. Patricia, we need to act quickly to protect what's left. I'm going to file an emergency petition to revoke the power of attorney and freeze any remaining assets immediately. James slammed his fist on the desk. This is criminal. We should be at the police station filing charges. Susan raised a calming hand. We will involve law enforcement, but first we need to understand exactly what happened. Financial crimes, especially within families, can be complicated to prosecute. What about my house? I asked suddenly. Could he take that too? Your home is in your name only, and wasn't part of your mother's estate, Susan confirmed. However, she hesitated. What? James prompted. If your financial situation is as depleted as it appears, you may have difficulty maintaining the mortgage and property taxes long term. The implication hit me like a physical blow. I might lose my home, the house where Kevin had grown up, where I'd lived for 20 years. This is insane, James muttered. Pat, you're moving in with Linda and me until we sort this out. No, I shook my head. I can't impose. It's not an imposition. He cut me off. It's family. Susan began outlining immediate steps. Freezing remaining accounts, filing for emergency injunctions, requesting financial records to trace the money, and preparing for potential criminal charges. We'll also need to look closely at Amber, she added. Based on what you've told me, she may have been the driving force behind this. I never trusted her, James muttered. Patricia, Susan said gently, do you have any income beyond what was in these accounts? The question forced me to assess my financial reality. My teacher's pension, I said finally. I had retired from elementary school teaching 3 years ago. It's about $3,000 a month. Susan nodded. That's something. And Social Security when you reach full retirement age. But not enough to maintain my current lifestyle, I concluded. No, she admitted. Not without the inheritance. As we left Susan's office with a folder of forms to sign and return, the full weight of my new reality pressed down on me. At 58, I was facing potential financial ruin. I might lose my home. My retirement plans were shattered. And worst of all, my only child, the person I loved most in the world, had done this to me deliberately. In the parking lot, James pulled me into a fierce hug. We'll get through this, he promised. Linda and I have savings. We can help you financially if needed. Pride made me want to refuse, but practicality won out. Thank you, I whispered against his shoulder. I don't know what I'd do without you. That's what family is for, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Real family, not whatever Kevin has become. As we drove back to my house, I gazed out the window at passing homes and businesses, all continuing their normal routines while my world had collapsed. I thought about my mother, about the careful financial lessons she'd taught me that I had abandoned in a moment of maternal trust. Mom would be helping me fight, I said suddenly. James glanced over. What? Mom. She wouldn't want me to give up. She'd tell me to use every resource, call in every favor, fight with everything I have. A slow smile spread across James's face. You're right. She'd be leading the charge. That afternoon, I called Susan and asked her to recommend a private investigator. If Amber was behind this, I wanted to know exactly who we were dealing with. I won't let them win, I told James and Megan that evening. I'm going to get my money back. Looking at their supportive faces, I felt the first stirrings of hope. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't walking it alone. 1 week later, I sat across from David Reynolds, the private investigator Susan had recommended. He was a former police detective with salt and pepper hair and the watchful eyes of someone used to noticing details others miss. We met in a quiet corner of a coffee shop far from my neighborhood, concerned that Kevin or Amber might have people watching my movements. I have preliminary findings, David said, sliding a thin folder across the table. You were right to be suspicious of your daughter-in-law. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Inside was a report with several attached photographs. Amber Nelson isn't her original name, David explained as I scanned the documents. She was born Amanda Peterson in Cleveland, Ohio. She's changed her name twice legally and possibly used other aliases informally. The first photograph showed a younger Amber with darker hair standing beside an elderly man outside an expensive restaurant. That's Harold Blackwood, a retired investment banker from Chicago. They were married briefly when she was 24, and he was 76. He died 6 months after the wedding, leaving her a substantial inheritance. His children contested the will, claiming undue influence, but ultimately settled out of court. I felt sick looking at the calculated smile on her face, the same smile I'd seen at family gatherings. She's done this before. David nodded grimly. At least twice that I can confirm. After Blackwood, she appeared in Miami under the name Amber Lewis. She became engaged to another wealthy older man, but the engagement ended abruptly when his family hired an investigator. The next page showed Amber with different hair again, this time with a man closer to her age. That's Michael Reeves. He appears to be a partner rather than a target. He has his own history of financial scams, primarily investment schemes targeting retirees. Is he still in her life? I asked, chilled by the possibility of multiple people orchestrating this betrayal. Unclear, David replied. But there have been some interesting money movements. 2 days after the largest transfer from your accounts, a wire transfer was sent to an offshore account in the Caymans linked to Reeves. I closed the folder, unable to look at more photos. So this wasn't just Kevin being greedy. She targeted him, targeted my family specifically because of Mom's money. David nodded. Based on my research, Amber's pattern is to find wealthy families, identify the most vulnerable or manipulable member, and work her way in. In previous cases, she targeted older men directly. With your family, she changed tactics and went through your son. How did she even know about us? I wondered aloud. Your mother's obituary mentioned her investment success and surviving family. For someone who researches potential marks, that's like a roadmap. My mind reeled with this new information. Kevin hadn't just betrayed me for money, he had been manipulated by a practiced con artist. It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped explain the dramatic personality change I'd witnessed. I need to show this to Kevin, I said, gathering the folder. David placed a cautioning hand on my arm. Mrs. Carter, I strongly advise against confronting either of them directly with this information yet. We don't know how they might react if cornered. He's my son. If I show him this evidence, he might warn Amber, giving her time to hide more assets or even flee. Or she might have contingency plans that could make things worse for you. I reluctantly agreed to wait until Susan reviewed the information. As I was preparing to leave, David added one final warning. Be careful with your personal safety. People who commit this level of fraud can become dangerous when exposed. Consider staying with someone else for a while longer. I thanked him for his concern, but inside I felt a growing anger displacing my initial shock and hurt. This woman had deliberately targeted my family, manipulated my son, and stolen my future. Despite David's warning, I needed to try reaching Kevin one more time. The next day, I drove to Kevin and Amber's apartment building. I knew Amber taught yoga classes Tuesday afternoons, giving me a window to speak with Kevin alone. When he opened the door, surprise flashed across his face before his expression hardened. Mom, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, moving past him into the apartment before he could object. The living room had been completely redecorated since my last visit just weeks ago. Expensive new furniture, artwork, and electronics filled the space. My stolen money on display. Nice upgrades, I said coldly. The inheritance is being put to good use, I see. Kevin crossed his arms defensively. What do you want? I pulled David's folder from my purse. I want you to know who you're really married to. As Kevin reluctantly took the folder, I explained what the private investigator had discovered. Amber's name changes, her previous marriages to wealthy men, her possible connection to a known con artist. This is ridiculous, Kevin said. But I could see doubt creeping into his expression as he looked through the photos. You're making this up because you can't accept that I'm in control of the money now. Kevin, she's using you. Once she has everything, you'll be discarded just like her previous husbands. He slammed the folder shut. Get out. Amber was right. You'll say anything to come between us and get your hands back on the money. My hands? My voice rose despite my best efforts to stay calm. It was my inheritance, money that your grandmother earned and intended for my retirement. Grandma loved me too, he shot back. She would have wanted me to have a good life, not by stealing from your mother. I stepped closer, trying to reach the son I'd raised. Kevin, please. This isn't you. The person I raised would never do something like this. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Kevin in his eyes, a flash of doubt or regret. But then the front door opened, and Amber walked in, dropping her yoga mat when she saw me. What is she doing here? She demanded. Leaving, Kevin said quickly, moving to stand beside his wife. She was just leaving. Amber's eyes narrowed as she spotted the folder on the coffee table. She snatched it up before Kevin could stop her and flipped it open. Her face drained of color briefly before she composed herself, laughing too loudly. Is this what you came here for? To show Kevin some doctored photos and made-up stories? She tossed the folder aside dismissively. Pathetic. I addressed Kevin directly, ignoring her. Talk to a lawyer of your own, Kevin. Not hers. Someone independent who can verify what I'm telling you. Back off, Amber hissed, stepping closer to me. You've lost. If you keep this up, you'll never see Kevin again. Her threat hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, Kevin was still my son, and the thought of losing him completely was unbearable. Think about what you're doing, I said quietly to Kevin. This isn't just about money. It's about who you are and who you want to be. As I left their apartment, I heard them arguing behind the closed door. I hoped I had planted a seed of doubt in Kevin's mind. But Amber's influence seemed overpowering. Back at James's house, I broke down completely for the first time since this ordeal began. Megan held me while I sobbed, mourning not just the loss of my financial security but the loss of the son I thought I knew. I don't recognize him anymore, I cried. It's like Amber's replaced my Kevin with someone else entirely. People show their true colors when money's involved, James said grimly. No, I shook my head. This isn't entirely his true colors. I raised him better than this. Amber found his weaknesses and exploited them. That night, after crying myself into exhaustion, I made a decision. I would fight not just for my money, but for my son. Somehow, I had to break Amber's hold over him and bring back the person I knew was still in there somewhere. The battle had just become about much more than financial justice. The strategy meeting at Susan's office included a growing team, Susan herself, her associate Mark, who specialized in financial fraud, James, Megan, who had taken a week off from her marketing job to help, and David Reynolds, who continued his investigation into Amber's background. We have good news and concerning news, Susan began, spreading documents across the conference table. The good news is that we've discovered a technical error in the power of attorney document. The notarization is questionable. The notary's commission had expired 2 weeks before the document was signed. Can we use that to invalidate everything? James asked eagerly. Mark tempered our excitement. It gives us grounds to contest the document, but doesn't automatically reverse transactions already completed. However, it's enough to file for an emergency injunction to freeze remaining assets. The concerning news, Susan continued, is that money is moving rapidly. Based on the records we've obtained, nearly half of the funds have already been transferred through multiple accounts, making them difficult to trace. How much can we recover? I asked, dreading the answer. With aggressive action, possibly 50 to 60%, Mark estimated. But we need to move quickly. Susan outlined the multi-pronged strategy, filing for the emergency injunction that afternoon, pursuing criminal charges for fraud and elder financial abuse, working with banks to flag suspicious transactions, and preparing for a civil suit against both Kevin and Amber. Elder abuse? I questioned. I'm only 58. In many jurisdictions, financial exploitation laws apply to individuals 55 and older when there's a fiduciary relationship, Mark explained. It gives us additional legal leverage. By the end of the meeting, I had signed multiple affidavits and legal petitions. Susan promised to file everything immediately and expected a hearing date within days. For the first time since Kevin's announcement, I felt a sense of forward momentum. As we left the law office, Megan's phone chimed with a text. Her expression darkened as she read it. "What is it?" I asked. "It's from my friend Sarah, who lives near you," she said, showing me the screen. "Someone broke into your house. The police are there now." We rushed to my home to find 2 police cars parked outside. Officer Bennett, a middle-aged woman with a practical demeanor, greeted us. "Looks like a targeted break-in," she explained, walking us through the house. "They ignored electronics and other valuables. Instead, they went straight for your home office. My office had been ransacked, drawers emptied, papers scattered everywhere. My filing cabinet had been forced open, its contents dumped on the floor. They were looking for documents," I realized. "Financial records, probably. Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Officer Bennett asked. James and I exchanged glances, and I hesitated before answering. "I'm in a legal dispute with my son over my mother's inheritance. He may be trying to find documents related to that." The officer took detailed notes and promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood. After she left, James insisted on installing security cameras immediately. If they broke in once, they might try again, he warned. That evening, as we sorted through the mess in my office, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mom," Kevin's voice came through, sounding agitated. "What are you doing? Why did lawyers contact us today about freezing accounts?" "I'm protecting what's left of my money," I replied coldly. "And by the way, breaking into my house is a crime." "What?" "I didn't break into your house." He sounded genuinely confused. "Someone did," I said. "Someone looking for financial documents. Quid a coincidence." "I had nothing to do with that," Kevin insisted. "Look, just drop this legal nonsense. The money's been transferred legally. You're just wasting what's left on lawyer fees." "I'm not dropping anything," I said firmly. "What you and Amber did was fraud, and I'm going to prove it." There was a pause, then Kevin's voice lowered. "Amber says if you continue with this, things will get much worse for you. This is your last warning." The threat sent a chill down my spine, but it also strengthened my resolve. "Tell Amber I got her message. And here's mine. I'm not afraid of her, and I'm not giving up." I hung up before he could respond. James looked at me with concern. "Was that a threat?" he asked. "Basically," I nodded. "But it tells us something important. They're worried about our legal action." That night, after James installed simple security cameras around my house, I received the first of what would become a series of anonymous phone calls, heavy breathing, then a whispered, "Drop it," before the caller hung up. When I reported it to Officer Bennett, she advised documenting every call but acknowledged there was little they could do until a more specific threat was made. She suggested changing my number, but Susan advised against it. "Keep documenting everything," she said. "Every threat strengthens our case." 3 days later, we had our first victory. The judge granted our emergency injunction, freezing approximately $350,000 that remained in accessible accounts. It wasn't the full amount stolen, but it was something. Megan's computer skills proved invaluable as she tracked Amber's digital footprint. "She's getting sloppy," Megan reported one evening. "She's been posting on a private Instagram account, showing off expensive purchases, a trip to Miami they've booked. She even joked about family donations in one caption." "Can we use that in court?" James asked. Susan says yes, especially combined with the evidence of offshore transfers, I confirmed. Every piece helps build the case. The intimidation tactics escalated. My car's tires were slashed in the grocery store parking lot. More anonymous calls came, some in the middle of the night. My email was flooded with phishing attempts, likely trying to access my remaining financial information. Through it all, I forced myself to maintain my routine as much as possible, refusing to be driven into hiding. But I also took precautions, varying my schedule, checking in regularly with James or Megan, keeping my location shared with them at all times. My mother's friends became unexpected allies. Harriet, who had connections throughout the community from her years of volunteer work, provided introductions to financial professionals who offered advice pro bono. My former teaching colleagues organized meal deliveries when they learned I was struggling. The community support bolstered my spirits, but nights remained difficult. Sleep eluded me as I replayed Kevin's betrayal in my mind, wondering where I had gone wrong as a mother, how I had missed the signs that he could do something like this. One night, as I sat on James's back porch unable to sleep, Megan joined me with 2 mugs of tea. "You should be sleeping," I chided gently. "You've done so much already." She shook her head. "I found something I wanted to show you right away." She opened her laptop, navigating to a private Facebook group. "This is a support group for victims of romance and financial scams. Look at this post from 3 years ago." The post described a situation eerily similar to mine, a woman whose son had married a younger woman who subsequently manipulated him into stealing his parents' retirement savings. "The tactics match Amber's exactly," Megan pointed out. "And look at the comments." Dozens of people had responded with similar stories. Some had recovered portions of their money, others had lost everything. But many reported that eventually, the manipulated family member had come to recognize the deception. "Kevin might still come around," Megan said softly, squeezing my hand. "Once he sees Amber for who she really is." It was a small hope, but I clung to it. The next day, Susan called with news the court had scheduled our hearing for the following week. More importantly, our filing had triggered a response from the district attorney's office. They wanted to interview me about potentially pursuing criminal charges. "This is a significant development," Susan explained. "If the DA gets involved, it adds substantial pressure on Kevin and Amber. Criminal proceedings could lead to plea deals that include restitution." As we prepared for the hearing, David Reynolds delivered his final report, which included a bombshell, a connection between Amber and 3 other cases of family financial exploitation across different states. In each case, the pattern was similar. She identified wealthy families, formed relationships with vulnerable members, and extracted money before disappearing. "She's not just an opportunist," David concluded. "She's a professional." The night before the hearing, I received one final anonymous call. But instead of threats, this time I heard what sounded like an argument in the background, then a male voice, not Kevin, saying, "This has gone too far. End it now." The call abruptly disconnected, leaving me wondering if we'd just heard from Amber's mysterious partner, Michael Reeves. I immediately reported it to David and Susan, who agreed it could be significant. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a sense that momentum was finally moving in our direction. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since that terrible day at the memorial service, I felt like we might actually win. I was in my temporary bedroom at James's house, reviewing court documents for the upcoming hearing, when the doorbell rang. Voices murmured downstairs. Then James called up, "Pat, it's Kevin." My heart leapt to my throat as I hurried downstairs. Kevin stood in the entryway, looking disheveled and exhausted. His normally immaculate clothes were wrinkled, and stubble shadowed his jaw. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice strained. "Alone?" James crossed his arms. "After everything, you think we'd leave you alone with her?" "It's okay, James," I said, surprising myself. "We can talk in the backyard." We sat on the patio furniture under James's maple tree, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. "You look terrible," I finally observed. Kevin gave a hollow laugh. "Yeah, well, things aren't great right now. I would think you'd be celebrating your newfound wealth." I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. He stared at his hands. "The money's mostly gone, Mom." "What?" I gasped. "How is that possible?" "It was over $2 million. Amber had plans. Investments, she said, would double everything." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't understand all of it. There were wire transfers to accounts I don't have access to. property purchases in other countries. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. She's preparing to leave you, Kevin. He shook his head vehemently. No, she loves me. We're having problems, but she wouldn't. The investments, the foreign property, she's creating her escape route, I pressed. Did you know she's done this before? Multiple times? Those files you showed me, he acknowledged reluctantly. I looked into them more after you left. Some of it checks out. But Amber explained everything. Those men took advantage of her, not the other way around. And you believe that? He didn't answer directly. She's pregnant, Mom. The news hit me like a physical blow. A grandchild. Something I had hoped for. But not like this. Are you sure? I asked carefully. I've seen the test results. Due in January. His voice softened. You're going to be a grandmother. I studied his face, noting the conflict in his eyes. Is that why you came here? To tell me about the baby? Partly, he admitted. And because things are complicated right now. Amber's been acting strange, secretive phone calls, disappearing for hours without explanation. When I ask questions, she gets angry, says I don't trust her. You shouldn't trust her, I said bluntly. Kevin, we have solid evidence now. The DA's office is considering criminal charges against both of you. His head snapped up. Criminal charges? Mom, you can't be serious. Deadly serious. What you did was fraud and elder financial abuse. You could go to prison. Fear flashed across his face. I never meant to, he stopped himself. It wasn't supposed to be like this. What did you think would happen when you stole my entire inheritance? That I'd just accept it and move on? Amber said you had plenty of other money, he said weakly. That this was just a portion of your savings, that you were being selfish, not sharing more with us. I leaned forward. Kevin, everything I had was in those accounts. I'm living with James because I can't afford my mortgage anymore. I might lose my home. He paled. That can't be right, Amber said. Amber lied. I cut him off. She's been lying to you from the beginning. We sat in silence for several minutes as Kevin seemed to struggle with competing thoughts. What can I do? He finally asked, his voice barely audible. Help us recover the money, I said immediately. Tell the truth about how this happened. I can't turn against my wife, he protested. Especially not with the baby coming. Then at least get your own lawyer, I urged. Not one Amber chose. Someone who represents only your interests. He nodded slowly. I'll think about it. But Mom, about the criminal charges, that's up to the DA now, I said, unwilling to make promises I couldn't keep. But if you cooperate, it would certainly help your case. Kevin left shortly after, promising to consider what I'd said. James was skeptical of the entire interaction. He could be trying to manipulate you, he warned. Using this supposed pregnancy to get your sympathy. The Kevin the First raised is still in there somewhere, I insisted. I saw it today. 2 days later, my tentative hope was vindicated when Kevin called Susan's office, asking to speak privately. She arranged a meeting with him alone. No Amber, no shared lawyers. He's scared, Susan reported afterward. Amber's behavior has become increasingly erratic. He found travel documents in her name only, and large cash withdrawals he can't account for. He's beginning to realize she might be planning to leave him. Did he agree to cooperate? I asked. Not yet, Susan said. But he's thinking about it. He's particularly concerned about potential criminal charges. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Megan, still monitoring social media, discovered something startling on a Miami nightclub's Instagram page, a photo of Amber with a man who wasn't Kevin, tagged as Michael Reeves. They were intimately close, his arm around her waist as she laughed up at him. The photo was dated just 3 days earlier. She told Kevin she was visiting her sister in Tampa, I realized. I called Kevin immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. After deliberating with James and Susan, we decided to email him the photo with a simple message. She's planning to leave. Time to choose sides. 24 hours passed with no response. I feared we'd pushed too hard and lost him completely. Then, as I was helping Linda prepare dinner, my phone rang with Kevin's number. Where are you? He asked without preamble, his voice tight with emotion. At James and Linda's. Why? I need to see you and your lawyer. Now. He sounded like he'd been crying. I'm ready to tell you everything. 2 hours later, in Susan's office after hours, Kevin sat hunched in a chair, looking utterly defeated. He'd confirmed the pregnant woman in Miami wasn't Amber, it was someone connected to Michael Reeves. She faked the pregnancy to keep me committed, he said hollowly. When I confronted her about the Miami photo, she laughed in my face, said I was a means to an end, nothing more. I'm so sorry, Kevin, I said, meaning it despite everything. He shook his head. Don't be. You tried to warn me. He turned to Susan. I'll sign whatever you need. Tell the DA whatever they want to know. I want to make this right. Kevin's testimony proved invaluable. He confirmed that Amber had orchestrated everything, including forging my signature on some documents and deliberately misleading me about others. He provided access to accounts I hadn't even known existed and detailed Amber's connections to Michael Reeves and their previous schemes. When Amber discovered Kevin's betrayal, her reaction was explosive. She showed up at my house, where I'd finally returned with new security measures in place, pounding on the door and screaming threats. You think this is over? She shrieked as neighbors watched in shock. I'll destroy all of you. The police arrested her for trespassing and making threats, adding to the mounting legal problems she faced. When they searched her car, they found packed suitcases and multiple passports, clear evidence of her planned escape. In the aftermath, Kevin moved temporarily into a small apartment, completely cut off from the wealth he'd briefly accessed. The criminal investigation progressed, with Amber's previous victims coming forward after media coverage of her arrest. Kevin faced potential charges as well, though his cooperation would likely result in a more lenient outcome. As for me, the legal fight to recover my money continued, but with Kevin's help, we had a much stronger case. Some funds were likely gone for good, but Susan was optimistic about recovering enough for me to keep my home and maintain a modest retirement. The hardest part remained ahead, rebuilding my relationship with my son. The trust between us was shattered, and while I was willing to work toward forgiveness, I knew it would be a long and difficult process. 1 month after Kevin's confession, as we sat in a family counseling session arranged by Megan, he finally asked the question that had hung between us. Can you ever forgive me, Mom? I looked at my son, not the confident man who had proudly announced stealing my inheritance, but the vulnerable boy I had raised, now humbled by his own terrible choices. I'm working on it, I answered honestly. One day at a time. The courtroom buzzed with tension as I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Susan. 6 months had passed since Kevin's betrayal, and today marked the culmination of our civil case against Amber Nelson and her accomplice Michael Reeves. Kevin, who had negotiated a plea agreement in exchange for his testimony, sat directly behind me. Amber and Michael had been arrested attempting to flee the country 3 months earlier. Their criminal trial for fraud, money laundering, and elder financial abuse would come later. But today's civil proceedings would determine how much of my stolen inheritance could be recovered. All rise. The bailiff called as Judge Eleanor Wilson entered the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewed the case files before addressing the courtroom. This is one of the most egregious cases of financial exploitation I've seen in my 20 years on the bench, she began. Amber sat at the defense table, her previously perfect appearance now subdued in conservative clothing, her blonde hair pulled back severely. She avoided looking in my direction. Michael Reeves, a handsome man with calculating eyes, whispered constantly to their attorney. Susan presented our case methodically, detailing how Amber had targeted my family after seeing my mother's obituary, orchestrated a deliberate scheme to access my inheritance through Kevin, and then systematically transferred funds through multiple accounts with the intention of disappearing with the money. Your Honor, we've traced approximately $1.6 million of the stolen funds, Susan explained, displaying financial diagrams on a large screen. We've located assets in the Cayman Islands, real estate purchases in Costa Rica and Portugal, and luxury goods including vehicles, jewelry, and artwork. The defense attorney, an aggressive man named Martin Green, attempted to portray Kevin as the mastermind, with Amber as merely an accessory. Miss Nelson was following her husband's lead, he claimed. She had no knowledge of the fraudulent nature of these transactions. This strategy collapsed during cross-examination when Susan produced evidence of Amber's similar schemes with previous victims, along with text messages between her and Michael discussing their plans for my mother's money dating back to before her death. The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. During our investigation, David Reynolds had located Harold Blackwood's daughter, Judith, who had fought Amber's claim to her father's estate years earlier. She had flown in from Chicago to testify about Amber's pattern of predatory behavior. She isolated my father from his family, convinced him we were after his money, then took everything when he died, Judith testified, her voice steady but filled with old pain. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. This woman has made a career of destroying families for profit. As Judith spoke, I noticed Kevin's breathing become uneven. I reached back and briefly squeezed his hand. Whatever his role in this disaster, I knew he too had been victimized by Amber's manipulation. The most difficult moment came when Kevin took the stand. He looked directly at me as he testified about how Amber had orchestrated everything, encouraging him to believe I was withholding money that should rightfully be his, coaching him on what documents to have me sign, and planning their escape once they had extracted as much as possible. She told me my mother had plenty of other money, he said, his voice thick with shame. That this was just a small portion of her wealth, and that she was being selfish. I wanted to believe it because it justified what we were doing. And now you know that wasn't true? Susan prompted. No, Kevin's eyes remained on mine. I nearly left my mother destitute. She could have lost everything, including her home. When Green cross-examined Kevin, he tried to undermine his credibility by highlighting the plea agreement that would likely keep him out of prison. You're testifying against your wife to save your own skin. Isn't that right? Green demanded. Kevin didn't flinch. I'm testifying because it's the truth. And because I'm trying to make amends for what I helped do to my mother. The most damning evidence came from Amber's own devices. Emails recovered from accounts she thought were secure revealed conversations with Michael planning their escape to Portugal with the old lady's millions once they had extracted everything possible. Once the son has served his purpose, cut him loose, Michael had written. Just like the others. To which Amber had replied, Don't worry, Kevin's useful for now, but he won't be a problem when the time comes. Seeing these messages projected on the courtroom screen, Kevin visibly flinched. The callousness with which Amber had discussed discarding him after using him to steal from me seemed to hit harder than anything else. By the third day of proceedings, even Green seemed to realize their position was hopeless. During a recess, he approached Susan about a settlement. They're offering to relinquish claims to all recovered assets and provide information about additional hidden accounts, Susan told me privately. In exchange, they want us to make a statement to the DA supporting leniency in their criminal case. James, who had attended every day of the trial in support, was adamantly against it. They deserve maximum sentences for what they did to you. I considered carefully. What percentage of my money do you think we can recover with their cooperation? With the assets we've already identified, plus what they're offering to reveal? Possibly 80%, Susan estimated. Without their cooperation, we might get 60% at most, and it would take years of legal proceedings. I thought about what my mother would advise. She had always been practical about financial matters, emphasizing results over retribution. Let's take the deal, I decided. I'll support reduced sentences, but I want full restitution and a requirement that they cannot profit from this story in any way. No books, no interviews, nothing. The final settlement exceeded our expectations. With Amber and Michael's cooperation, we recovered nearly 90% of the stolen funds. The court ordered the liquidation of all their assets, with proceeds going directly to me as restitution. They would still face criminal charges, but with my statement supporting a measure of leniency in exchange for their cooperation. As the judge formalized the agreement, she addressed me directly. Mrs. Carter, you have shown remarkable composure and dignity throughout these proceedings. While the court cannot undo the emotional damage caused by this betrayal, we can at least ensure that you are made financially whole. Outside the courtroom, reporters had gathered, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. James helped me navigate through them to a quiet side corridor where Kevin waited, looking uncertain. Mom, he began, before words seemed to fail him. We have a lot to work through, I said quietly, but today was a good start. As we walked out together, I reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. I had lost my mother, been betrayed by my son, nearly lost everything I owned, and fought a battle I never expected to face in my late 50s. Yet somehow I felt stronger than before, more certain of who I was and what I valued. The money would return to my accounts. My home would remain mine. But the journey to rebuild trust with Kevin, that would be the final battle. One fought not in courtrooms but in quiet conversations, consistent actions, and the slow healing of deep wounds. That evening, as James, Linda, Megan, and Kevin gathered in my living room, the first family dinner we'd had since the memorial service that started it all, I looked around at these people who had fought so hard for me and felt a profound gratitude that transcended the pain we'd all endured. 1 year after the court case concluded, I stood in my garden planting spring bulbs, daffodils, tulips, and my mother's favorite hyacinths. The garden had always been Mom's domain when she was alive, and I'd neglected it during the turmoil of the past year. Now, digging my hands into the cool soil felt like reconnecting with her. "Need some help with those?" Kevin asked, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. "Thanks." I accepted both the offer and the coffee, taking a break on the garden bench. My son looked healthier than he had in months. The haunted, shameful expression had gradually faded as he worked to rebuild his life. He had found a job at a local marketing firm, moved into a modest apartment, and started attending therapy twice weekly. Most importantly, he was making consistent efforts to repair our relationship. "The tulips will look nice along the fence line," he observed, kneeling to continue planting where I'd left off. "Your grandmother always said you can never have too many spring flowers after a hard winter," I replied. Kevin nodded, understanding the metaphor. We had endured the hardest winter of our relationship, and now tentative new growth was emerging. The financial resolution had proceeded smoothly after the court decision. With Amber and Michael's cooperation, we recovered approximately $2 million of my inheritance. After legal fees and taxes, I had about $1.8 million restored to properly structured accounts, enough to secure my retirement and keep my home. Amber and Michael were serving 5-year sentences for fraud and financial exploitation, with additional time likely from cases in other states. The emotional resolution proved far more complicated. In the early months after the settlement, Kevin and I maintained a careful distance, connecting primarily through family therapy sessions with Dr. Landon, a specialist in family betrayal trauma. Those first sessions were excruciating. Kevin's shame and my anger created a seemingly unbridgeable gap between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," Kevin had said during one particularly difficult session. "I just want the chance to show you I'm not the person who did those things." "But you are that person," I had countered. "That's what scares me the most. I raised you, loved you, trusted you completely, and you were capable of this." Dr. Landon had helped us navigate these painful conversations, encouraging honest expression without destruction. "Healing doesn't require forgetting," she explained. "It requires understanding, accountability, and new patterns of behavior that rebuild safety." Gradually, we established a new relationship, not the implicit trust of before, but something more conscious and intentional. Kevin adhered scrupulously to the repayment plan for his portion of the legal fees, never missing a monthly payment despite his modest salary. He called regularly, helped with household projects, and respected my boundaries without complaint. Most importantly, he listened, really listened, when I spoke about how his betrayal had affected me. "The worst part wasn't the money," I admitted during a walk 6 months after the trial. "It was standing in that room full of people and realizing my own son saw me as nothing but a resource to be exploited. It made me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship." "I can't defend what I did," Kevin had replied after a long pause. "But I want you to know it wasn't really about you. I was so focused on what I thought I deserved, on impressing Amber, on proving myself. I stopped seeing you as my mother. You became an abstraction, just an obstacle to what I wanted. That doesn't make it better." "No," he agreed. "In some ways, it makes it worse. But I'm trying to understand how I became capable of hurting you that way, so I can make sure it never happens again." Now, as we planted flowers together in the spring sunshine, I recognized how far we had come. Trust was returning in small increments, built on consistent actions rather than grand gestures or promises. James and his family had been instrumental in this healing process. Initially skeptical about reconciliation with Kevin, James had gradually softened as he witnessed his nephew's genuine efforts. People can change if they really want to. James had conceded after Kevin spent an entire weekend helping him rebuild his deck. He's not the same entitled kid he was. Megan had been the first to fully embrace her cousin again, her natural empathy allowing her to see the complexity of his situation without excusing his actions. Amber was a professional manipulator, she reminded us. She knew exactly which buttons to push. As Kevin and I finished planting the last of the bulbs, I suggested lunch. We walked together into the kitchen that had once been the scene of our most painful confrontation, now transformed back into a place of simple family comfort. While preparing sandwiches, I asked about his upcoming apartment lease renewal. Actually, he hesitated. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I've been saving, and I think I might have enough for a down payment on a small condo by the end of summer. That's wonderful, I said sincerely, remembering when homeownership had seemed an impossibility for him after the legal and financial fallout. I'd like your advice about the mortgage options, he added carefully, if you're comfortable with that. The request represented a new milestone, Kevin asking for financial guidance rather than expecting or demanding assistance. It acknowledged both my expertise and the painful history we shared. I'd be happy to look at the options with you, I replied, appreciating his thoughtfulness in how he framed the request. After lunch, we visited my mother's grave, something we'd begun doing monthly as part of our healing routine. The cemetery was peaceful, cherry blossoms floating gently across the manicured lawns. I wish I could tell her I'm sorry, Kevin said as we stood before her headstone. She knew you weren't perfect, I replied. None of us are. But I think she'd be proud of how you're rebuilding your life. As we walked back to the car, Kevin asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. Do you ever regret not pushing for a harsher sentence for Amber and Michael? I considered carefully before answering. No. The criminal justice system will handle their punishment. What mattered to me was recovering what was stolen and making sure they couldn't do this to anyone else. Mom's practical approach to money, Kevin observed with a small smile. She taught me well, I agreed. Money is important, it provides security and options. But it's not worth destroying relationships over. Real wealth is knowing who you can count on when everything falls apart. That evening, surrounded by family for a birthday dinner James and Linda had organized for me, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The past 18 months had stripped away every illusion and forced me to rebuild my life on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom rather than naive trust. My financial security had been restored. But more importantly, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed. I had learned to fight for what was mine, to rely on family in ways my independent nature had previously resisted, and to find a path toward forgiveness that honored my own boundaries. As I blew out the candles on my 60th birthday cake, I silently thanked my mother for the inheritance she had truly left me, not just financial resources, but the resilience and practical wisdom that had guided me through the darkest period of my life. The journey hadn't ended. Kevin and I would continue our careful dance of rebuilding trust. The painful memories would never completely fade. But sitting there, watching my son laugh with his cousin, seeing my brother's protective glance in my direction, I knew with certainty that we would be okay. Some inheritances can be stolen, but others, the ones that matter most, remain ours forever. If you've ever had to rebuild trust with someone who betrayed you, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Was forgiveness possible for you, or did you choose a different path? Remember to like this video if my story resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with anyone who might be facing similar challenges with family and finances. Thank you for joining me on this difficult journey. And remember, your worth isn't defined by what others take from you, but by what you choose to rebuild afterward.